right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Post Game Podcast. Appreciate you tuning in and checking it out here. My guest today is a sports executive who's done it all. He has been an entrepreneur, worked for Disney, helped launch the NFL flag football program, been a GM in the Arena Football League, and also leads GamePlanU, a platform connecting athletes and entrepreneurs. His name is Rob Thompson. So no, it is not Topper Rob Thompson, the Philadelphia Phillies manager. However, this Rob Thompson also has an awesome story himself. He shares what it was like growing up with dyslexia, how he found purpose after sports, the behind-the-scenes story of starting the NFL flag program. He goes into NIL and a little bit of his theory of why solopreneurship is the new internship. So really enjoyed this conversation with Rob. He has done an awesome job in the sports world over the years, and just excited for you to check this one out as well. As I've mentioned in previous introductions here, go check out the Post-Game Podcast on Beehive, where I will be putting out a weekly newsletter in addition to the podcast episode each week. So Post-Game Podcast, Beehive, go check it out, sign up, and get some good stuff in there too. So thanks for tuning in. I appreciate you stopping by and checking this episode out. Think you enjoy this conversation with Rob Thompson. All right, Rob, live here, man. Rob Thompson, appreciate you coming on. We just chatting a little bit before this. So we connected about 2 years ago, and it's just your birthday. It's your birthday the other day, so your name popped up, and it just reminded me. I'm like, I've been meaning to reach out to Rob, and you're all over the sports world. You've spent, don't want to date you. You've probably spent a couple decades in the sports world, sports business, and yeah. So I'm just looking forward to hearing your story and just learning from you here. So yeah.
Well, I'm glad we connected on this, and you obviously impressed me right off the bat because you did your homework, and I certainly appreciate that. So we're ready to go.
All right, awesome. Thank you. So the football journey. So you play college football. And well, yeah, so what was the story with the football journey? Because at that time, I think I remember you saying it was basically a community college, but you had a bunch of guys go to the NFL, and then you played professional football overseas. So I'd love for you just to rehash that time period in your life.
And back in the 80s, the Northeast isn't known for community colleges, right? It's prep schools, So those of us from New Jersey, the boroughs of New York City, Connecticut, there's this Division II level that's, up in Northeast that was pretty popular for a while because you get Prop 48 kids, basically academic kids. And other parts of the country, you go to a JUCO for a year or two to, retake your SATs. But more or less the Northeast kids, we got Division II. And it was a sleeper for many years. You get the PCAC out, in Pennsylvania with those schools, Slippery Rocks of the world and, Westchesters, and there's a lot of dudes that come out of that whole area, and there's just a lot of kids that play. It's a condensed area. So I was one of those kids. I was a Prop 48 kid coming out of high school. I didn't know it that I had dyslexia coming out of high school, and I was a lacrosse and a high school player. And most of the recruiting I had, I was an All-American, 2-time All-State in both sports, and I had no opportunities because of my grades, and it was very, very frustrating. So I ended up going to school in my hometown, University of New Haven. Our line coach at the time was Tony Sperano, who went on to be the head coach of the Miami Dolphins and the Raiders, and he coached in the league for a long time. And he grew up here too, and he went to New Haven as well. And he came in and said, "Hey, I'm your last chance, man. It was last chance you back in the, so it's kind of now or never." And when I got there, I had to basically just take a test to get into the school, and it was an aptitude test for math. And that's when I found out I had numeric dyslexia. Yeah, so it's really just what I found out later on in life. And the woman who gave the class, she basically said, "I can help you," and she helped me understand what it was. I went to a very urban high school, and I was one of the kids that didn't cause any trouble and played sports. So they wanted to push me out. I mean, it was really like a 1.2 grade point average. Like getting a D+ for me was big. And it had nothing to do with that. It was everything with attention, ADD, and all that other stuff that gets wrapped into it. But where I really excelled and what helped me was art class, music class. It was all the creative stuff. Audiovisual. We had a huge audiovisual club, so I got into the media side, editing, filming our games of basketball and hockey games. I love all that stuff, and I did really well. And she helped me understand what that was. And then once I understood kind of how to manage that, it excelled for me. But I was able to play 44 college football games, started every game I was there, went on to be an All-American in college, and then signed with the Patriots right after the draft. And then went over and played over in England for 22 games over there, basically a season. And then I got into coaching. And then Coach Barano was at Boston University, and he hired me as his line coach, and off I went with my career. So, and I met my wife there for 35 years in college. So it all worked out. My dad and my grandfather were at every practice up in their lawn chairs, like the two grumpy old guys from the Muppets up in the corner. That was them. That was my grandfather and my dad up there for 4 years. Never missed a practice. It was great. It all worked out.
That's awesome. That's very cool. So yeah, because just thinking about you saying that, and just the route that you've taken in entrepreneurship, which I'm excited to get into you with, but you probably wanted a corporate path and more of that structure might not have worked out for you with that. I mean, maybe it would have, because you could cut out your own part of that entrepreneurial journey, but it's like that the textbook type of thing just wasn't exactly in the cards for you necessarily.
Well, it's funny because I did spend 20 years in corporate with the NFL and with Disney. But I was in very creative roles there, and so it did work out. But you're 100% correct, Joe. Going into a corporate structure is very suffocating from somebody who has most entrepreneurs, a lot of them have dyslexia, some form of it, or ADD, because you don't have that trigger of, oh my God, what if this doesn't work? Like, I never thought of it. Like, the risk, even with a wife and 4 children, I never even thought of that. I've always kind of, you look past it, because that independent freedom of creativity, and unlimited opportunities, that takes over your brain when you have that. But no, you're absolutely right. But I've had 5 startups, and a couple start overs too.
Right.
So.
Yeah. All right. Fair enough. Yeah. Cause I know you're with Disney, and then, the Arena Football League and everything. So maybe what I meant by corporate is just some of that, really know what
structure, Joe. That's what it is.
The textbook type of thing.
It's structure. Yeah. It's structure. The jobs that I had with Disney and with the NFL did not require me to be in the office. I was a traveler. I was a pirate. So I was on the road with events. Yeah. So it was perfect.
Got it. Okay. So that first startup, then, it was a recruiting company, right? For high school athletes, connecting them with college coaches. So maybe you just explained a little bit. You didn't really have that fear of failure. And at that time you could take more risks because you're younger. But what was that experience like, just starting a company, and then you ultimately exited from it, right? I think a year later. So I'd love to just hear a little bit about that.
Well, I think the great thing about that transition from being an athlete to going into business is kind of rediscovering your purpose, and you're so programmed, and you're so used to that world and that culture, and that's where all your network is in your experience. So you kind of lean into it. That's why you find a lot of former athletes get into coaching and scouting and stuff like that, because of that. You don't know what else to do for the most part. I discovered when I was coaching, this is way before there was recruiting services or combines or anything to really find those diamonds in the rough, or aggregating all these athletes in kind of these areas. BU sent me on the road to California to go find JUCO kids. And I was like, where the hell am I? How do I start this one? And I ended up running into a guy who was he was a retired coach and athletic director of Santa Barbara Community College. And he was a Northeast guy, so I got referred to him. I called him up, and he basically said, fly out here, come spend 2 or 3 days with me, and then I'll show you every single kid you need to see that could qualify, a qualified lead for you. And when we're out there, and him and I just hit it off, and, had this great little setup, garage overlooking the Pacific Coast Highway, smoking cigars. His wife is old school Italian from Rhode Island. It was great. We had a ball. We just like an uncle to me. And he basically said, you need to do this in the Northeast. The Northeast, especially Connecticut, Rhode Island, is a flyover state for college football coaches. Right? They fly south and west. They don't fly to the Northeast. And if you can identify these kids for them, with a different type of lens, where you're just not talking to the coach, and the coach is going to talk up every kid, where you give a different viewpoint on this, I think that's what the Northeast would need. Boom, done. Went back, flew back. Here's the kids I have. By the way, Coach Sperano, thank you for the opportunity. I'm going home to get married because my college girlfriend's my wife, was my wife now, but I left her to go to Europe. Then I left, I came back from Europe, and 2 days later I went to BU to coach, and I was like, I can't do this to this woman. So I said, I'm going to go home and I'm going to start a recruiting agency. So that East Coast Recruiting Agency was the very first recruiting agency out there, official one. And within the first, 4 or 5 weeks, we signed up 300 colleges that paid us $250 each. And we gave them every kid from Connecticut, Rhode Island area, some New York. And we just evaluated all the kids. Coaches gave us their game film. And then we started a couple camps after that, O-line, D-line camps and tight end camps, just because everybody knows who the skill guys are is the lineman, the interior, the inside. It's always harder to evaluate.
Yeah.
So that was a nice business. And then I sold it. Yeah, I sold it like 18 months later to Athletes Inc., which did global recruiting. And then eventually they got bought out, and I got introduced to the folks at the NFL, starting the youth development programs, which became NFL Flag. So yeah, that's why I transitioned over to that.
Yep. Cool. Was I reading something? I thought maybe on LinkedIn that you said you might have exited that too early. Am I?
Yeah,
is that accurate,
no,
or?
I did. I should have held on to that. I should have held on to that one. Yeah, because that one was cranking, and there wasn't any overhead. And everything was like 80% margins on that business, it was great. And I should have trademarked the O-line, D-line camp because other coaches went on to do it. This was 92, 90, 91, 92, 93. I mean, there was nothing out there at this time, and my first camp I ever did, I had Coach Sperano, right? And then I had Dave DeGuglielmo, who went on to be line coach all over the Giants, the Patriots. I had some Pete Rosamondo is now a head coach in Texas, and I just had a great staff, and they helped me develop it. And it was, we had 20 teams, high schools, send their entire O-line to our O-line, D-line to our camp, and a lot of other individuals. Like, we came out of the gate swinging, and it was a great name, great brand, and I just kind of gave it away, to be honest with you. And I didn't know any better. I was so excited to go work for the NFL to run all their youth development programs. It was like, hey, what I should have done is I just kept it and had the NFL bought it, buy it from me, So anyways,
yeah.
What do you know?
Well, so it is 2020. So the rest of the story, you wouldn't have had, maybe you wouldn't have had some of the other opportunities that have come across. So the NFL Flag. So would love to hear a little bit about that. And then the arena that led into the Arena Football League, right? Or what was the timing on that? So, yeah. So what were you doing with the NFL Flag?
So it was this new play football program, and I get introduced to them back in 1994, and they were just putting it together. So the NFL Flag program is basically came out of what it used to be called NFL Air It Out. So it was a recreational 4-on-4 flag football, which I worked on in the beginning. It's kind of interesting what happened from there. We basically added one more player, and then we created all the training, all the coaching manuals, basically how to coach kids, right? So it wasn't really, let's take a bunch of old school high school football guys who couldn't wrap their head around flag football. But I took a lot of gym teachers, a lot of folks that understood, soccer coaches who understood the small-sided version of sports, the 5v5, 3v3, how to coach the attention spans, the wants and needs of children. And then we morphed that into, we don't want to take away from what parents are, because parents are busy. I at that time, I had 3 kids. And it was like, we're busy with these kids running around. I don't want to take away from these kids playing soccer. I want to add one other sport on a Sunday after church or before church for an hour, and then show up half hour before the game so you could just line the kids up, make sure everybody's there. Like, you don't need to practice. You're going to play. There's no championships, and we're just going to play a season. We want to put a ball in every boys and girls nest. This is before all the third parties. So this was Park Recs, YMCAs. Like, we had to do your partnerships with the school systems to make it part of gym class. So there wasn't this third-party tournament operator at this time, right? So it was so grassroots. So the NFL hired me to help them create all of those rules, to be the kind of the football guy on their staff. and then go out on the road, which I did for 10 years, and work with every team, got into all the school systems, got to meet the park recs, the YMCAs, the Boys and Girls Clubs, all the kind of the youth programming in those markets. And then the last 2 or 3 years, I went international with it once we kind of built it up. But it was a lot. It wasn't something NFL flag didn't start 2 years ago. NFL flag started 30 years ago with the league, right? And then the league's priorities changed into, tackle U14s and U12s, and then the USA football came about, and a lot of the funding that came from the league shifted over to the international side, or the USA football side of it, which is the NGB now. But really, it's interesting to see how it came full circle that tackle football is not the Olympic sport. It's flag football that's the Olympic sport, and it's something that we've created 30 years ago that, I've always spent my career, Joe, behind the scenes. I've always was the behind the scenes guy, whether I was a lineman by nature, and then everything I did has always been behind the scenes. So it's kind of the guy pulling the strings, the guy kind of putting up the cones, the guy running with the walkie-talkie in the golf cart. That's always been my role, and I love that role. Like, the guys under the tent and the guys with khakis on and dress shoes, and it's 80 degrees down in Miami, God bless them. They're just scheduling where you're going to dinner that night. I'm actually out there working with the coaches and the staff and the kids and the parents, and that's always been the role I wanted the most, and I enjoyed being the most. So that was the NFL flag program. What happened was at that time, NFL bought 80% or 51% of the Arena Football League. So to kind of connect those two together, and Sam Baker at the time was a commissioner. He ended up becoming the executive director of NFL Pro Bowl. He was the big giant that would show up at guys' doors and knocking on them, like Herman Munster, and telling guys they got into the Pro Bowl. At that time, Sam was the commissioner of the Arena Football League, and I got to know him and his staff about grassroots programming, youth development programming. We're starting to implement it with the Arena Football League. And he was talking about how they're having this smaller market Arena Football League called AF2 come around the country. They were setting up 30-something markets for it. And he was like, where do you want to go? Are you done with this youth football stuff? Like you've been there for almost 10 years. You want to be a GM in Arena Football League and help us expand the sport. And that's when I jumped. I said, absolutely, let's do it. And that's when I jumped up to Albany and put in an expansion team up there.
Okay. Yeah. What was that like, being in the Arena Football? I remember when I was a kid, I would go to the Philadelphia Soul games. I think it was Jaws, right? It was Jaworski that was the owner of them. So being the GM of an Arena Football, that's got to be a grind, right? Because I can't imagine those guys are getting paid very much. The travel is probably still similar, right? Or maybe it's much, the budget is much lower, obviously. But what was that experience?
Yeah, it's a great question. At the end of the day, it's pro sports, right? It's pro football. Guys are getting paid. You're exchanging money for their performance. So it wasn't difficult to find high-level guys that could play. The biggest challenge was finding the right guys that were there for the right reasons, right? So you didn't need a roster full of guys from Power 5 schools. You needed a roster full of guys that had a chip on their shoulder. And so we found guys. Joe was one of the greatest experiences of my life and my family's life. We had an incredible experience there because I think I went through it knowing what it's like to kind of build up an organization. This was different, right? In the sense that you had to do it all. You had to do the football ops. You had to sign players. You had to sign coaches. You had to sell sponsorships, sell tickets, put grassroots programs in place. But I knew what kind of guys we wanted because it was kind of the same when I was recruiting for the European leagues and when I played over in Europe, right? It wasn't the big name guys that did the best over there. It was the FCS Division II, Division III kids that really, really wanted it. Like, we were so excited to be there. Like, we would run through a wall to win those games. Like, D1 kids, anybody that played at a Power 4 school, even before what's happening now, that was their NFL experience. Right, that was their professional sports experience. Whether they made money or not, they got to play and got treated like NFL pro players, right? So, you're in front of 60, 70, 80,000 people every weekend signing autographs, and you're the big stud on campus. Playing D2 football, it's like your parents and the band parents and we ran around my senior year, like I told you, we had 5 guys go to the NFL. I matched that up with any Power 4 school. And our coaches, they all went to be head coaches in the NFL. So it's not about where you play. It's about the experience that you want to get out of it, right, with the right mindset. So these guys that we looked at arena football, we took the guys that, that had that 1 or 2 years, was an All-American maybe at Colgate, and then signed with the Cleveland Browns and got released. And, I don't know if I want to play over Europe. I want to stay home. I want to play arena football. I got you. That's the guy I want, right? And those are the kids that we went after. I said, we drew a circle 3 hours away from Albany because I wanted their parents to be able to come watch them and their girlfriends or whatever. And we recruited kids from the Northeast, and we went 36-6 in 2 years, and it was all a bunch of kids from Colgate and Fordham and UMass and, Yale, and it was all FCS Division II kids. We would go down and play in Texas and Florida with all rosters from kids that played at all the big name schools, and we go down there and smoke them. So that's where the perception, most people take the perception of where you went to college and where you played college football higher than if you played in the NFL or if you played pro football. Because remember, there's 5% of these guys, these dudes that play high school, make it to college. Right. And then if you're playing after college, you're part of 1%. It doesn't matter if you're playing in the NFL, arena, CFL, over in Europe, you're 1%. Right. You could probably name on one hand how many kids that you went to high school with that played in pro football. Right.
Yeah. One hand.
Yeah.
0. Yeah. I don't know if I'd even did any fingers
right.
yet.
And it's probably 2 hands with maybe kids that played college football. Right. So it's not many, and finish. Right. And finish playing, like play 4 years, not just I went on and I hurt my knee and I didn't play anymore. So I think the perception where parents are looking at, especially in college now, it's this D1 thing that people talk about on social media all the time. Right. It's so blown out of proportion. It's get a roster spot. Just try to get a roster spot is the hardest thing to do right now. Anyways, so arena football was very much kind of that I guess ecosystem of there's a ton of talent out there. There's a ton of guys out there that are willing to play for very little. And you just got to find the right guys for the right reasons. And you could do magical things if you understand that part.
Yep. Oh, without a doubt. So I feel like that's a perfect segue and just what would be the right word? Maybe microcosm for life, pretty much. I mean, yeah, it doesn't really matter. That's what we were talking about from before we were recording. When I went to Seton Hall, rarely does that even come up in my day-to-day life. So it's almost what you make out of the current situation. So it's a good life lesson. What about kids these days? I mean, just kids that are in the NIL and all that, because that's going to be a totally different situation and just, yeah, you're almost going to be taking a step back going into a professional. So I was talking to a guy the other day, Rashad Campbell. We were talking a little bit about this, how, yeah, you're going to get paid in college through NIL, and then figuring out that next step after college might be a little bit tougher because you're like, shit, I was just getting paid X number of dollars and now I'm going into whatever job it is. So yeah, I'd love to hear your opinion on that.
I think there's 2 parts of this. I think NIL, if you put it over to the side, you're talking about division, you're talking about Power 5, call it Group 5 football and major college basketball, men's, and probably half women, right? The rest of the sports, you get a little bit of in there, like baseball in the SEC, and you might get a little bit of volleyball out in the West Coast for women's volleyball. That's pretty popular. The Big Ten is pretty popular. But other than that, 99% of the sports and the kids that play, there's 500,000 kids that play NCAA. Out of that, you're going to have probably 400,000 that have been given the permission to explore what that next thing is. And if they could use NIL to approach future employers to be a brand ambassador Or from what I believe in, it's the permission now to explore entrepreneurship, because there's no better time in these kids' lives than start a business while they're in, I call it, the locker room and the dorm room startup, right? This is the greatest time to do it because everything's covered, right? Their food's covered, their housing's covered, everything's covered for them. They're not married, they don't have kids, right? They don't have a mortgage, they have no pressure at all. And if their idea doesn't work, they go to practice tomorrow and try something else, right? So for us, you and I, we do that. It's like, man, there's a lot riding on it, right? Or any of our listeners right now, there's a lot riding on it. But in college kids, no. NIL has given these kids a permission to explore what that means. I say solopreneurship is the new internship. Right? Start a business from your phone, sell t-shirts, right? Flip sneakers, start a mobile car washing business, right? Start a one-on-one coaching business. All of those things, as you know, every single thing that's going to be involved in there, customer service, marketing, sales, right? All of that, the information behind the scenes of taxes, LLCs, well, how do I file? All of those things are going to do more for them than an MBA will, right? 100%. Start a business. Don't worry about getting your MBA because that's not going to do shit for you unless you go to a Harvard, right? And where you're going to meet the people in that room. That's the only way. That is your value, and it's not going to be the shit that you have to do behind the scenes, right? And all the hard work and all the homework. Start a business from your dorm room. There's your MBA, right? Ready, set, go. It's as simple as that, for 99% of the kids. Those 1% that do take the track to Harvard, God bless you, because now you're in a room with people that can really do business with you. And all you're doing is paying to get in that door, right? You're not paying for anything else. You're paying to get in that door and meet those people. So where you are in college right now, as a young junior or senior or even a sophomore, those people around you, the resources around you in your classroom, right? Maybe there's a VC fund that attached to your school. There's seed capital. There's resources that you can use, the professors and the alum that can help you. Once you're done, put your big boy and big girl pants on because no one cares, right? But when you're in here, you have a voice, you have a platform, you have some value because you're a college athlete. You won the 5%. So buckle up and get it done now and use this transitional period to discover what is next. So to me, that's what NIL is about, period.
Yes. Okay. That's phenomenal because there is no better time to be, if you're a Division I athlete right now, forget the sport, like you said, just the brand that you can build. And I not to be, because obviously you need to have a brand, you need to have a personal brand, but it's just you're so marketable, like you're saying, and whether it's a company that will want to partner with you or a future employer, just seeing that you can take those steps right now. It's kind of like this, like you did a podcast yourself, you wrote a book. I'm just putting these podcasts out there outside of my day job. And you can literally just, if you're interested in something, there's the gates that are up there to prevent you from doing that have never been easier to break through, I think. So it's just a matter of starting to do it. So, and that's what I want to ask you about a little bit here with, so you had a podcast years ago. You wrote this book. Who were you interviewing for the podcast? And what was that about? That was in the sports and entertainment space, right?
Yeah.
What was the goal of that?
I've always had a podcast at some point. I think I've had 4 so far. And over 10 years, is kind of right there. I've always used it. When I first started, it basically was for me to use it for business development side of it. And it was a sports biz podcast where I was interviewing leaders and executives in the sports industry. So a lot of them were just friends of mine that, sports and media that I've known forever. And I just wanted them to share their story. It wasn't more of a, hey, it is a radio thing. It was really just share your story. I mean, how'd you do it? Because the biggest thing is none of us plan to be in the sports industry, and this is pre-sport management degrees, so it wasn't that kind of that scam that the colleges are running now to try to get you to get a sport management degree, which qualifies you to sell tickets for commission. Good luck. Just from high school, you go do that and save your money. But so I think it was like, how did you do it? How did you find your way there? How did you recognize it? And it all came down to, I think, one of the questions on there, that's the kind of the 10 things in your life that you need to really focus in on. And looking back at the things that just my story was about, I didn't see it coming. I didn't do it. It was entrepreneurial. I saw a need in the marketplace for recruiting, and I created something. And it really became from an entrepreneurial spirit more than this is a career path for me, So, but everybody has their own. Like I would say 80% of them was because of friends and family or neighbors or their former soccer coach who had a contact at the New York Jets and they got an internship. And then 80% of it was through their contacts, through their relationships, and most of which didn't come from their college. It came from their parents and their friends and their relatives that hooked them up with their first job in sports. So, that's why I named the book, How to Land a Dream Job If Your Dad Doesn't Own the Team. It was like, how do you get in if your dad doesn't own the team?
It's a great book title, but
right. Yeah. It was a long title, but it was like, but that's it. How do you do it? And it's changing now. So, anyways, that's really what the podcast became, the book, and all that other good stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, so the book, awesome, funny name, funny book title name, but it's true, right? How do you do it if your dad's not, or your neighbor, or anything like that? But it's just a couple of these things that I jotted down. It's like each job is a building block. Serendipity, that volunteering in Maine, tapping into the alumni, which you talked about. So maybe based on what you're just saying, your aunt. So you wrote a little bit about your aunt, who is the ultimate connector. Because I've been thinking about this a little bit, just how the value of an introduction. If you can make an introduction for somebody, one of the most valuable things I think that you can do, and pair them up. So your aunt, just tell that quick story, because I think that would be valuable.
She was a character. She was an old school Northeast Irish woman who just had great stories and, ripping cigarettes like they were tied to her fingers. That was her. And she was tied into, she realized, she never went to college and she worked for the railroad, but she got in. She loved hosting parties. She got in politics, and she knew she had access, right? She had nothing to offer other than she was a connector. Right. And she had this cool little house with a pool and the whole thing. And she would host all these political events. And she always said, Rob, it's just little me. I worked on the railroad. I was an operator on the railroad, but I have all this power in town because I connect people. And that's what she was. She was the one. She had no agenda other than connecting people. So she used her relationships as her value and as her currency. Right. So she would always say, network, Rob, it's going to set you're going to get everything you want. Like majority of the time to get your foot in or people take notice of you, if you bring something of value, typically, which is money, right? Or some kind of capital. So whether you're in the startup game as a VC or whether you're a donor at a college. Anyway, so Aunt Dot, the character that she was, used to say this all the time to me, and I would spend all my summers from 13 on up over at her house, and she would always have these people of power, whether it was the governor of the state or whether it was politicians or senators or state representatives, and I got to know all of them. And later on in life, I realized that I never had a resume my entire career. I never needed one because I built relationships along the way. And even in business development, so if you're in sponsorship sales or business development, typically, I realized earlier on, a warm lead, you got a huge chance of securing that piece of business through a warm lead, through, hey, use LinkedIn for that. There's a reason why LinkedIn is there. It's to, hey, could you introduce me to such and such, right? Do it. Do it. Don't put them out. People, think about it. When people reach out to you, it's like, hey, do you mind me? No, I'll do it. That's what it's for. So it's the greatest hack. If my Aunt Dot ever had LinkedIn, oh my God, I can only imagine what she would have been able to do, right? So it just shows you that you don't need a position of power other than the willingness to accept invitations, to connect people, and be willing to help them with that without expecting anything in return. And that was my Aunt Dot, and she got a tremendous amount of respect and power because she was willing to do those things for other people. Yeah. So it was a huge life lesson for me.
Yeah. It's a great story because it's Oh, it's so true. Yeah, I work in business development, and if you cold calling, especially if you're whatever, this is me, but cold calling into an area that isn't the local 610 or whatever your area code is, I'm not answering those calls the calls that come through that I don't really recognize. So if you can get a warm lead,
It's
it's, oh
huge.
my gosh, it's a game changer. But yeah, yeah. And then a few other I don't want to read
Okay.
through these notes, but there's, I think, a couple of good other things, like be willing to serve the cookies. You had this coach, Tommy Groom, which is also a really good, now we're throwing out these
Yeah.
almost life lessons, but it's right. Find a few good mentors. And then the best place I've ever worked
Yeah.
is wherever I'm at. So just doing the best job that you can right there.
So,
Yeah.
so I'll,
Again,
yeah. So
yeah.
two
Do you have
things.
any
So I had a
thoughts
boss
there?
at Disney, and he was a high level. I rolled up to him. I didn't report directly to him, but he was a high level guy, and he had everybody come out to Burbank. We had a big meeting, all hands on meeting, and a lot of us were meeting up for the first time. A lot of different divisions of the company. He just kind of rolled into this role, but he'd been with the company for a while, so we knew who he was. High profile dude. The first, we were in the ABC building on the studio lot, really cool space. And he's walking around the meeting. I didn't know, I knew what he looked like. I didn't know it was actually him. He was walking around with a big tray of cookies and giving them to people, just serving people. And here's a little cookie. And he could have been someone that worked for the catering service. You didn't know. And there was always a life lesson for me. It was a great lesson and a reminder. I mean, first of all, people that work at the Walt Disney Company, 90% of them are just spectacular human beings to begin with. But his whole philosophy was, he said it later on, was, don't be afraid to serve the cookies. Like, you're like everybody in that room. He was like, you guys, I work for you, and I'm here to serve you. I'm here to help your careers. Like, I'm just a puppeteer. Right? I'm just the guy trying to help you do those things. And it was a great lesson later on in life with leadership and working with people of, you know, they don't owe you anything if they work for you, and your sales staff, just your team around you is like, you're there to help them. Like, you're there to help their job, their career, whether that's a lot of positive reinforcement. Anyway, so he was like, don't be afraid to serve the cookies. And he was right, and he lowered his, I'm sure he wanted to be the big shot walking around, but that wasn't him. Anyway, so he's a great leader and a great guy, and he's still there, and nothing but respect for him. So Sean Kosha is his name, just great. And then the next, Tommy Groom. So Tommy, I met earlier on. Tommy coached college football for 35 years. I grabbed him because he was my guy, like out of Central Casting. Right? He looked like Leslie Nielsen, really sharp, had the Southern accent, always tan, always dressed to the nines, and he coached, like I said, for 35 years, but every 5, 6 years, a lot of those guys, they move on and move on and move on. And I said, all those years, and he'd been married. Every time he moved on to, for some reason, he got remarried, and he's just he did a crazy lifestyle. But Tommy, everybody loved Tommy. But I remember he was earlier on in my career. We would travel 180, 200 days a year, and I was constantly with him. And I would always pick his brain, as a young dad, a young husband, and trying to figure out my way in life. And he was that older senior guy who's seen it all and done it all. And I asked him one time, it was like, Tommy, where was the best place, you ever coached? And he coached all from Virginia Tech to Maryland and all the way up to Ivy Leagues to Division III. I mean, he coached at every level. Army, he coached at every level. And he looked at me and he said, Robbo, best place I ever coached was wherever I was at. To me, that I never met anybody that lived in the moment, had the feet where their feet were. That's the moment he lived, is that very moment. He was dialed in. He made you feel great. He listened to what you have to say. Everybody around him was part of his fun day that was going to be. Every day was a fun day. And he'd always say, keep the fires burning, positively positive. He goes, Robbo, there's days, you don't want to get out of bed. You don't want to face what you got to face. And, of course I have bad days, but your mindset of that day and the mindset of, hey, maybe this job kind of stinks, or I don't really want to be at this school, or the whole thing, to him that was the greatest place he ever was right there at that moment. And I think if more people take that, and I wish I took that and I listened to him all the time, and I always remind myself, there was moments because I was so thinking about that next thing, the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. Is this the right thing? Is everything going to turn out right for me and my life? And always, and it did, right? It always did. And that lesson earlier on, when he told me, and I was late 20s, just really kicking off, and that helped me with everything. It was like, yeah, every place where there's going to be great people, right? There's going to be something you like about it. I mean, we've moved so many times. There's going to be something that you like or don't like, or whatever, your neighbors or your family or people you work with. But at the same time, you chose to be there. Make it the best place. Make it the best opportunity. Learn something from it. And so Tommy Graham, God bless him. He was the best, Yeah, he was the best.
That's all. Robbo. That's funny, man. But it's so true, because you're always trying to get to that next thing. Yeah. You're always trying to, you said it. What's next? What's next? What's next? So just being where your feet are. Yeah. You hear that playing baseball, but it's hard to keep it in perspective. But Rob, awesome, man. So listen, as we start to wrap up here, how about, game plan? What are you doing with game plan? So that's the reason why, and so I want to hear you explain it, but that's why I started this podcast is, hey, so you play sports at whatever level you're playing at, you have to transition into what's next. You have to find a career. How can you do that? And then recently I've been curious to talk to guys who have been entrepreneurs who have really crushed it in business. So is game plan helping with that? Or would love to just hear how game plan.
So I started GamePlanU about 9 years ago. And that really was for those college athletes that are making that transition. So obviously pre-NIL, I always looked at as an entrepreneur and as an angel investor, I loved anybody that was part of that 5% that played college athletics, because there's that inherited grit, determination, persistence, and all of those things. So that was kind of the first level. So GamePlanU is really to do just that, and then to help student athletes kind of figure out their pathway of that transition and starting it while they're in school, while they're still playing, right? And that has evolved. Now I'm over, I've taken on a lot of different projects to help sports properties and athletes make that transition or try to figure out commercializing whatever that is. So right now I have formed a partnership with the Walter Camp Football Foundation, which is the oldest football foundation, basically the oldest college football property out there. Walter Camp is the iconic, he's the founding father. He created the rules, and then he created NCAA, and he's a towering figure that no one knows, right? Because the Heisman commercialized it and Walter Camp never did. So they asked me to help them commercialize it. So I have rolled up GamePlanU 5% Club underneath Walter Camp Properties. So part of what we're doing is the honoring of the 136 All-American teams, not just Division I, all the way down to NAIA, because if you make it All-American at any level, it's special. Just to play college football in and of itself, it's special. But the programming in there. So we're going to have a new Athlete Entrepreneur Award this year. So 1,300 colleges, men and women, student athletes that have created an enterprise, an idea, or have created a startup business that impacts the way that we watch, play, or consume sports. We want to recognize you and honor you. So your athletic department is going to get opportunity to nominate you through your SAC program or whoever that if you're kind of on that career path of an idea and you're putting that idea into action, we want to find out who you are, come into the nomination process, and then we're going to have awards and we're going to do showcases and pitch competitions and really provide some support resources and hopefully some funding to help you launch that business. So whether you're a current student athlete or a former student athlete, to represent your college, that is going to be the one award that we're going to do different besides just the college football All-Americans. Because Walter Camp was a junior in college when he created the rules for American football. So he was the original athlete innovator. And then he went on to be a content creator because he was a writer for New York Times, and he came up with the All-American Awards, and he did that for 50 years. And so he was basically a writer, and he promoted the sport through articles and books and wrote 30 books. I mean, the guy was amazing. And he ultimately created the NCAA in 1905. That was the start of it, because the college Ivy presidents wanted to get rid of basically football, because of violence and all the things we're faced with now, because of the injuries, because of commercialization. Guys were getting paid back then because it was only club sports, and the eligibility rules because guys were transferring and getting paid by the alums at other schools. So everything that's happening now 120 years later. So, so I took everything that I'm doing with athlete entrepreneurship, rolled it under Walter Camp, and it's Walter Camp Properties and all that other good stuff. So that's what we're doing.
Nice. Well, that's awesome. Yeah, 120 years later. What do they say? History doesn't repeat itself, but it definitely rhymes. So there you go. All right, Rob. And then one last thing too, just more so related to business, because, well, what you're talking about is business as well, but you did a little bit of real estate, and we've talked about this, that there's going to be so many opportunities for not only former athletes, but anybody just to make a living, maybe in a different way that didn't even exist 5-10 years ago. Yeah. You're active on LinkedIn. I'm working on that. I want to put a little bit more out there, but what do you suggest me for an athlete who's coming out of school? I know you said make your own thing, but is that maybe the advice? Like, don't be afraid to put yourself out there, and because there's so many other more tangible businesses like real estate that you can invest in, things like that. But you just explore.
Yeah,
what are your thoughts
question.
on that?
Thanks you definitely did your homework. I wish if my dad was that guy. He never went to college, but he got into real estate and flipping homes early in the 80s and 90s. And that gave him financial freedom by the time he was 55 years old. And he worked corporate. He had a corporate job selling sealed. He worked for a craft. He was a craft guy, but he flipped homes and bought homes and rented them out and all that. And he was self-taught. He was a handy guy too. So, and I did the same thing for my kids. I said that if you do anything, don't get an MBA, get your real estate license. Like, that is, all of us need a place to live, and so do your friends and family. Right. So that is one thing I could say. And if colleges ever smartened up and made a course for real estate investment, real estate finance, you're going to have to understand that piece of it. If you invest in real estate earlier on in your career, that will give you the financial freedom where you have some FU in you. Right. So that will give you the financial freedom that you don't like this job anymore. All right. I'll go do something else. Why? Because I got income coming in from this rental property, right? So it gives you some flexibility in your life. And if you do it earlier on, the hardest part is to get the money up to begin with to buy your first property. But the financial pieces of that is going to last a lifetime. I wish I learned the financial piece of it earlier on in my career. It would have helped with some hardships and hard times that we had, because you're going to have them. Right? You're always going to have them. You're going to start a business and lose a business. You start a business and sell a business. You're going to get a job that you love, and you're going to get fired. Right? All of that will happen, and has happened to all of us. Right? But if you have rental properties, or you have real estate that you could dip into, whether it's borrow against the equity, sell, right? Leverage. That is I would say every single college student, while you're in college, if you can, get your real estate license. Understand it. Understand the financial piece of it. It is the greatest. Just think, if you buy your first house, you're going to save 3 to 4% on it anyways, because you're going to pay yourself that, So, and if you help your friends and family sell it, or you go and invest in it, you have your real estate license, and you're going to save on their interest all automatically. You can understand the financial piece of it. So all the other things in stocks and bonds and everything else that people tell you, and yes, 401k, and to invest early on a high yield, all of those things are great. Real estate. There's probably, I think there's about 8 of the guys I graduated college with that have done really, really well financially for themselves. A little blue-collar school like New Haven, there's probably 8 millionaires and 1 billionaire from my teammates. 1 billionaire, one guy in billions, and the other probably 8 or 9 are multi-millionaires. They all did it in real estate. They all did it in real estate, or a version of it in real estate. Developers, private equity, REITs. But a portion of what they did and how they earned their income and how they gained wealth was through real estate. So don't sleep on it, learn it, and do it sooner rather than later. There you go.
There you go. Billionaire, huh?
God bless him.
That's pretty cool. One of your buddies is
yeah, it's kind of cool. It's like Entourage. It's like an Entourage moment. We're all a bunch of nitwits.
Yeah.
I'm like Turtle. We're all a bunch of nitwits getting on his.
You know what? So. You did pretty well for yourself too. So Rob,
right.
Thanks, man. Thanks. I'm glad we connected and reconnected. And yeah, I know we'll run here, but just appreciate the time, and we'll follow you. We'll chat too, and I'll put where to contact you in the show notes and everything like that. But awesome connecting, man.
Thanks, bud.
Thanks a lot, Rob. All right.